Wow.
right? So for a
That's huge.
female, even if she just goes on a very low carb diet for 4 days, she could cut her leptin concentrations, which also fuel her thyroid, by 50%.
Do you hear this, ladies?
And to me, well, the thing is, to me, like it just made sense.
Yeah.
I'm like, why are people not doing this? And then the really cool part was when I started to bring these athletes to the shows, they were getting leaner than they had ever been.
Mr. Grazione.
Yes, sir.
How are you, sir?
Extremely blessed.
Good, man. Same here, same here. Well, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to join us here on the Legacy Podcast. If you don't mind, tell the folks watching at home a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Will Grazione. I'm the owner of a nutritional coaching company called The Educated Dieter. I've been nutrition coaching now for the better part of the last 15 years. So I got involved way before social media and Instagram and all that kind of stuff. So would like to say I have a different experience just because I did get started before the big boom. But I got my undergrad in exercise science, and I graduated in 2010. And after that, I just became obsessed with health and fitness. I started as a personal trainer after I graduated from academia. And I realized that there was a lot of misinformation in the industry. I realized that the industry in and of itself was flooded with information that really wasn't helping people. And so what I strived to do as a personal trainer was meet the client where the client was and work to optimize confidence inside of the gym. It gave me a lot of, I guess, purpose in life, knowing that I would have clients that would walk in the gym for day one of training. And they'd walk in and their heads would be down. You'd see they wouldn't have confidence and such. Then you start to get them strong. Then they start lat pull downs at like 100 pounds. You know, the girls were like overhead pressing the 35s and 40-pound dumbbells. They're deadlifting, they're squatting. They're doing all these amazing exercises that really allowed their confidence to soar. And those same women, day one, that I would see walk into the gym, now they're walking in with their chest up and their head high, right? And that was when I realized that my life and what I wanted to do as a profession had purpose. Up until that point, Stephen, I was all over the place. I was working 4 jobs. I was a janitor, a martial arts instructor, trying to get my online coaching business off the ground, also doing some personal training. And so I kind of realized, I'm like, okay, this isn't really what I want to be doing, which is working all these different jobs. I really wanted to hyper focus on one specific area. And that one specific area for me, little did I know, it was kind of like something that was eventually going to blow up. But I think I just got into it at a really good time. And I found a mentor. His name was Lane Norton. And Lane was the first person that I'd ever met that was doing what I wanted to do. At that point in time, everybody was telling me, Will, this is a pipe dream. You're not living in reality. You're living in a fairy tale land. They're like, how many people do you think are going to be online wanting you to coach them?
Little did
And I'm
they
like,
know.
I don't know, but I think it's a lot,
Yeah.
you know? And then fast forward, Lane kind of showed me what was possible. And once I saw what was possible, the rest is history. And I ended up quitting all 4 of those jobs. And within my first year, I was completely full and just very grateful that I happened to take that leap of faith. That's also about the same time I met my wife, and we decided to grow the business together and help as many people in the world as we could.
That's awesome, man. You know, I look at you often as a great father, a great husband, great at your craft. How do you balance all of this with multiple check-ins, multiple clients that you work with? What's that look like?
If I told you I'm perfect at juggling it all, I would be lying to you. I think it's a skill that you acquire over time. You know, it's no different than the first time you had your first child, right? And you and Sonia are just like, okay, how are we going to make this work?
Yeah.
Right. And then when you have it kind of like it reaches a status where you just balance out.
Right.
You have another child, and it adds to the chaos. Now you have to rebalance. And so what I like to tell new coaches when they're getting started is you just take it like 5 or 10 clients at a time,
right,
and you adapt,
right?
Right. So as a coach, I think it's important to have structure. I think it's important to have discipline, to wake up at a certain time, get your check-ins done at a certain time, have specific standards that you try your best to live by. Maybe it's like a 12 or 24-hour response time or something like that. And time blocking would probably be the other, I'd say, superpower that I think all coaches need.
Yeah.
You have to have that time blocking. I would also mention that there's not a lot of good nutrition coaches in the industry that are husbands and fathers. Many of them are single, living in an apartment, answering emails all day long. So they have a lot of time to dedicate to
Right.
it. But definitely when you have a wife and children, you're taking care of them. You're also taking care of a whole host of clients. It's a balancing act. And, I think as long as you have the discipline to wake up and get the most important things done first thing in the morning, you can very well grow a very respectable roster and grow yourself as a coach in our industry.
Yeah, agreed. I think at the end of the day, it's just being there for your clients, right? And
Mm-hmm.
being somebody that they can trust in and know that they're getting good quality information. And more
Mm-hmm.
importantly, the support. That's
Yeah.
a huge, huge piece of the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
In your years of coaching, what are some of the common themes that you see in folks that have struggles adhering to a plan or working through the process?
I think it's important to, again, like I said before, meet the client where they're at. I think sometimes we can allow the amount of information that we have at our disposal now
Right.
to completely just flood the client's brain, get them confused. Whereas if we take a normal person who's not used to tracking their protein, not tracking their workouts, not doing any type of step counting or cardiovascular exercise, not used to taking any types of supplements, and we throw the whole kitchen sink at them
Yeah.
at one time, that can be very overwhelming. And if you don't meet the client where the client is, it's easy to say, I just started this thing, but I'm going to quit now.
Right.
Because it's just too much. It's overwhelming, right? You take somebody who's already stressed out and you throw so much more stress on top of them. Usually the response to that is it's too much.
Absolutely.
Right? So what we have to do most of the time is meet the client where the client is based off of their prior experience before starting woo-woo with us.
Right.
Right? Whether that means, hey, let's just start tracking your protein intake. Let's try to get you to eat 2 or 3 servings of vegetables a day. Let's try to get you to eat 2 or 3 fruits a day. Let's make sure you're not doing that 0 fat diet that you were doing before.
Right.
Let's add some fats back in. Oh, you're not used to walking because you work from home and you live a box life. Drive in a box, work in a box, live in a box, all that kind of thing.
Right.
Let's get some walks in.
Yeah.
When's the best time to walk? All right? I like clients to walk in the morning, right? So I think you just have to meet the client where the client is. And sometimes the access of information can be very overwhelming. But at the end of the day, all we're trying to do is teach you the truth. The misinformation that's out there and the amount of, call it fear mongering that's occurring, I think it's very unfortunate because you're taking people that don't have a base subset of information and you're scaring them to think that they can't drink water, they can't eat carbs, they can't eat fats, they shouldn't eat as much protein, they shouldn't eat anything processed. You're really scaring them. So that kind of puts them in a position where they're almost like paralysis by analysis.
Of course, yeah.
They're just not willing to do anything because they're scared of everything. So I think with people like yourself, myself, and other evidence-based coaches that are out there in the space, I think what we have to do is make our truthful voice equally, if not louder, than the people that are spreading the misinformation.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the biggest things that I hear from my clients is, well, there's just so much information on the internet. And do I go with the keto diet? Do I go with this elimination diet? And it's our jobs to really educate them on the importance of a balanced diet and really understanding their body. Well, tell me a little bit about your experience adding blood work into the recipe of being a coach. I know that there's not many of us that actually operate this way. So can you talk a little bit about how you use that in the way that you build programs?
Yeah, sure. So I think initially the way that it started was I was a bodybuilding coach specifically. And what I noticed throughout long contest preparations, which basically meant an accumulation of stress on the human organism, the organism in and of itself will adapt accordingly based off of how much stress you put it in, right? Now, it starts with the central nervous system. So you've got your sympathetic driven nervous system and your parasympathetic. Most of the time when you're putting somebody on very aggressive calorie restriction, a lot of exercise, a lot of training, they become more sympathetic driven or cortisol driven. And for the female physiology, this is extremely important because they typically will see some of the negative symptoms first. What that means is they'll usually acquire some type of a gastrointestinal issue. Maybe they're not going to the bathroom every day. Maybe they notice that they have more anxiety, more stress, they can't sleep. That's usually followed by something called hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is where women will lose their periods. Anemia, very, very normal. Hypothyroidism, very normal. And at about 2015, 2016 in my career, I started to notice that a lot of women, we were doing the same dieting approaches
Right.
and we're trying the same stuff, but their bodies would almost, in a sense, like stop responding. Like there was some type of resistance there. And I'm like, what's going on here? When I push them harder, it's almost like they gain weight or their body stops responding.
Right.
So what do I need to do from a recovery perspective to implement this thing into their prep or into their fat loss phase so they can actually keep going? You were a football player. I was a football player, right? You always had a halftime.
Oh, yeah.
Logically think about this. What do you do in a halftime? Go into the locker room,
Yeah.
you rest,
Recalibrate.
you hydrate, grab a snack. Coach comes in. All right, guys, this is what I saw in the first half. This is what's working. This is what's not working. This is what we're going to do. So I said, well, damn, there's no halftime in bodybuilding.
Right.
But maybe there should be, right? So I said, well, I've already been utilizing carb cycles. I was already using like a 1 high carb day per week type of strategy, and that seemed to work well, specifically for men. But the 2 high carb days per week seemed to work better for girls. And I think the rationale to support that was because they needed more recovery than the men did.
Right.
This is also why the research kind of states that like men can basically go on carnivore, keto, very low carb environments, and they will get very, very lean to a point to where once they get under 10% body fat, obviously it's not healthy hormonally. But the female physiology, it's not to say that it's super sensitive or that women should be treated like flowers and all that kind of thing. But I do think that they require more recovery than men do.
Right.
And that's just what I happen to notice in the trenches of coaching as many clients as I was. And so what I decided to do is I said, hey, we're doing like a 16-week prep or maybe an 18 or 20 week. It really didn't matter the duration because all I was doing was I was saying, we're going to take at least 1 to 2 weeks and use a diet break approach in the very middle of that prep. It's a halftime.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh yeah, I played soccer, I played softball. I was working with a lot of previous athletes that found themselves inside of bodybuilding. And so they all understood it. And I said, what I want you to do though, I'm going to make a Word doc. And I want you to fill out how you feel in the Word doc before we start the diet break. They'd fill all that information out. I'd have them pretty much review it with me, either on the phone or an email. And then 2 weeks later or a week later, we'd go through the same questions and they would answer them. Everybody felt significantly better afterwards.
Right.
So I said, this works.
And what did the weight look like when you were going through that diet break?
So because we're resetting calories back up to their theoretical maintenance level at the time that we implement the diet break, the weight would maybe go up by like 1 to 3 pounds.
Okay.
You're a big guy, 6'5", 270, right?
Yep.
So in your case, you'd probably expect maybe a 3-pound increase, but it's all intramuscular glycogen. We're not regaining fat.
Right.
We're just refilling glycogen to basically help your metabolism get back to a status where it can thrive.
Right.
So remember in the education course, we were talking about glycogen converting into leptin. Leptin can basically upregulate, downregulate based off of the energy going into
Right.
the organism, right? And so that leptin serum, if it's high, it's sending plus signals everywhere. It's
Right.
like crank up, go, 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 sweat, burn. But once you begin to diet extremely, there's a scientific research study that basically stated 4 days of very low calorie dieting will cut leptin levels by 50%.
Wow.
Right? So for
That's
a
huge.
female, even if she just goes on a very low carb diet for 4 days, she could cut her leptin concentrations, which also fuel her thyroid, by 50%.
Do you hear this, ladies?
And to me, well, the thing is, to me, like it just made sense.
Yeah.
I'm like, why are people not doing this? And then the really cool part was when I started to bring these athletes to the shows, they were getting leaner than they had ever been. And like my natural guys, strided glutes, all of them. The bikini girls, most of them would win. And I even had a natural girl back then who we did not diet her for fat loss. We actually kept her close to maintenance calories for
Right.
8 weeks, going into NPC nationals, and she turned pro. 100% natural, without any enhancements, without any anything. Now, granted, there are some genetic elite women out there that have the potential to do this. And then obviously once they turn be pro, they can decide what they want to do. But from a genetic perspective, I think this is where intelligent and educated coaching makes a world of a difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I know that you really dug into using the diet breaks and a lot of these tools with the female athletes. What would you say is the number one challenge you see with competing bodybuilders that are female athletes? Like the
That's a
absolute
really good
biggest issue.
question. Because I think you could dive into this a couple different ways. Because one of them is the physiological stuff. The other one's the psychological stuff that nobody really talks about because it's kind of dark and it's not, So I'll unpack a little bit of both. I think the main issues that I see, number one, from a diet perspective, are there's no intentional recovery focus. Everything is we start prep 12 weeks out. I give you 900 to 1,000 calories. We're going to start with an hour of cardio and we're going to build up from there. I'm going to start you on these specific supplements, blah, 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 blah. And then once the woman stops responding, which could be halfway through, which could be 8 weeks out, 10 weeks out, 6 weeks out, wherever they are, then usually the unintelligent coach would say, okay, now it's time to, are you ready to take it to the next level?
Right.
Which ultimately means now we're going to pull out the Anavar, the clenbuterol, the T3, and whatever other drugs that they want you to use. Now, I think that for some specific athletes, there's a time and a place for it. So I'm not trying to convince everybody here to be 100% natural if your goal is bodybuilding. But I do think that if you learn to diet a woman more intelligently, you would not ever stall her out, and you could actually continuously get her leaner going into the show, and then more than likely have her ready a couple weeks out, and then actually start reverse dieting her into the show, which ultimately will just make her look even better. Right. So that from a physiological perspective, I think the linear dieting is a really big problem. I'd also say, and you're probably very well aware of this, and we're talking about this at a very specific time, but the Arnold Classic just happened.
Right.
The dehydration protocols, in my opinion, are probably the most dangerous part of bodybuilding. And a lot of it is because you're tampering with the body's natural fluid dynamic shift. Right. So you've got a sodium and potassium pump. In a perfect world, in order to maintain an appropriate sodium to potassium pump or hydration status ratio, you'd be at like a 4 to 5 to 1 ratio of sodium to potassium. But what happens inside of a lot of these like peak week programs is they will take sodium and they'll floor it. No sodium, right? And even if you're like cooking ground turkey or something, like pour all the juice out and all that kind of thing. And then they also load potassium. When you do that, you can actually create heartbeat irregularities, right? And ultimately you can kill somebody. If you, unfortunately, I've seen it happen a lot. But you can stop somebody's heart if you load too much potassium. And then afterwards, the edema effect, that's also not healthy either because you're going through these rapid fluctuations. So from a physiological perspective, I'd say the most important thing is the dehydration. I'd say the second most important thing is going to be the linear dieting, extremely, extremely aggressive. And then I'd say from a psychological perspective, the thing that's not oftentimes talked about is the fact that a lot of athletes are praised when they win. They're praised when they look a certain way. A female, walking around at 9% body fat with a fair amount of lean body mass who goes to a show and she wins, she's praised for how she looks at the most unhealthy she's ever been. You know what I mean? But then in the off season, they're criticized and they're slandered and they're, oh my God, I can't believe she gained all that weight back. You know what I mean? So they're devaluing health. At the same time, they're overvaluing, I guess what I call like vanity, starvation, just something that's not physiologically healthy for the female physiology to be in that position. So what I would like to see is a big shift from let's not only like glamorize them when they're at their fittest, but let's really celebrate them when they're at their healthiest, which is in the off season, which is when you should be getting lab work done. You should be getting pre-labs, you should be getting post-labs, so you can see from an internal health perspective, where was this female athlete when she started prep? Where was she at the end? Then when you can compare and contrast that data, now you know exactly what you need to fix in the off season.
I think you would agree with this statement. Most people have some level of body dysmorphia.
Oh yeah.
If you really want to take that body dysmorphia to the next level, just compete in bodybuilding.
Yeah, I think I still have some.
Yeah.
You know, I like to live around like 12 to 13% body fat, somewhere around there. But when you get to the point where, like, I mean, nowadays the bikini girls have striations in their glutes,
Yeah.
right? But when you get to a point where you're literally counting glute striations as a bodybuilder and you're counting the veins in your quads and you're like, okay, this is the best I've ever looked. From that moment moving forward, you always kind of see yourself as being like, that's normal.
Yeah.
And anything above that is fat.
Yeah, I agree. You know, and I think we can talk about all of those things, and those are all big pieces of bodybuilding, but some of the positives I think that come from it, and likely things that have led into our careers and where we're at, is the mindset, the discipline, the motivation, the ability to train on the days that you really don't want to, or to eat the lean ground turkey when you don't want to, you know, to not have the cheat meal. So I think it's a love and hate sport, man.
Well, there's so many pros and cons to it. And I actually did a podcast on this years ago, but it was you know, what bodybuilding taught us about life. And the reality is, the reason I believe I'm still here doing what I do is because of what I learned in bodybuilding.
Yeah.
Right? It's like the tireless effort of waking up at a certain time and getting everything you need to get done with precision on a routine basis that leads you to becoming a champion.
Yeah.
Right? Think about that in terms of just life in general or in business. Story for you. I was told by my old boss, who I was a karate instructor, a janitor, and a personal trainer out of his facility for about a
utility knife,
about a year and a half. I was doing a lot of different jobs, and he watched me prep for 20 weeks. And this was in 2012, where I turned professional in the International Federation of Physique Athletes. And I turned pro at that show, so I was classified as a natural professional bodybuilder. And after the show was over, like the whole prep, he never said one thing to me about the prep or anything. He just watched me come in with my lunchbox and my meals, and everything's perfectly calculated, my training, the cardio I did. He watched it all. And then after I won, he's like, young man, let me talk to you. It's like, okay. I walked into his office, and he was like, I just watched you for 5 months be the most precise you could possibly be with this whole bodybuilding thing. He said, if you took even close to half that effort and you put it into a business or being an entrepreneur, he's like, you would never fail.
Wow.
And I was like,
wow.
So, you know, it was nice to hear that from somebody that I looked at and I'm like, wow, he's super successful. You know what I mean? And he said that, and I was like, okay, well, now the challenge is, now how do I take that energy and put it into something different than bodybuilding?
Right.
You know, but that was a really cool point, and that was actually a turning point. And him telling me that was kind of the driver that allowed me to quit all the other jobs and just go full bore on this.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. Talk to me a little bit about the dynamic of a husband and wife that compete.
Oh, man.
So, you know, I don't know how many people know Tanya was a competitor as well. And, and a great one at that. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So that's actually how my wife and I met. I was introduced to her at the karate school. And then, I think she kind of found out that I was involved in bodybuilding. We started to train together periodically. Really funny story, though, was a buddy of mine invited her to train with us one day. And we were training legs. And I said, look, man. I said, what are you doing, bro? Yeah. What are you doing inviting a girl in to train with us? I was like, listen, man, if she slows us down, I'm not training with you ever again. Yeah. Right? And he goes, no, man, it's going to be cool. It's going to be cool. And that day I said, all right, well, I'm going to crush her. Yeah. And it was like my ego, you know? Yeah. I was like, I'm going to crush her. Right? And she comes in, and we go through a grueling leg workout. She never bowed out. She never stopped on a set. She never stopped on a rep.
You knew.
Nothing. And I was like, holy crap. And I thought to myself, afterwards, I said, hey, you can train with us whenever you want. But that's actually like how her and I met. And so she asked me to start to train her. And she had aspirations of wanting to build muscle and become the strongest version of herself. And that's essentially how our relationship started, was just we were training partners. We were best friends. It was never anything like emotional. It was never anything relational or had to do with anything physical.
Yeah.
Everything was, I was the coach, she was an athlete client, and she had a goal. And so we were best friends for like 9 months, I think, before I ever even hugged her.
Wow.
And nothing.
Yeah.
It was, we're meeting at the gym, we're training, and her physique took off. I think she probably built like, in that 6 to 9 month time frame, I think she probably added like 5 or 6, maybe 7 pounds of lean body mass.
Solid.
But you could see, like, for a figure girl to gain some mass on her delts and her quads and her back and all that, it was very impressive. And so at that point, I knew she could turn pro. And I think the dynamic of it really was like, our friendship is so deeply rooted. Our marriage now is so deeply rooted inside of the friendship that even when we enter hard, challenging times, we're still best friends at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Right. So I would never say anything to hurt her. And likewise, she would never say anything to hurt me, because our relationship is so deeply rooted in the friendship aspect. Yeah. And I just wanted to help her achieve her goals and dreams. And I also had a very, sensitive spot in my heart, because my mom was a single mom as well. And when I met my wife, she already had a daughter who was 40 years old.
Right.
And I think I was 24, maybe 25, I decided to, go into their life and try to make it the best impact I possibly could. So the dynamic is very simple. You support each other, you love each other, you're rooted inside of friendship, because hard times are going to come.
Oh, yeah.
Right. But when the hard times come, what's your, how do you respond inside of those? And I think for her and I, we've always had the ability to talk to each other without trying to hurt each other. So I think that's probably the most important factor. Is it all started with 9 months of friendship and coaching.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the dynamic of being able to know what that tough spot is like, right? That tough space. Mm-hmm. It's very helpful in a relationship. I look at, even through my prep and going through bodybuilding, Sonia doesn't compete, but I always tell people my family goes through prep when I go through prep. And,
sure.
The bad days, the good days, and everything in between, mm-hmm. without having somebody who's really there in your corner to support you, it's hard to do this sport and be good at it.
Yeah, I mean, when her and I were doing it at the same time, I would say it was a little bit challenging, but that's also when I decided to reach out and hire a coach. Because mm-hmm. up to that point, I prepped myself for all of my shows up until my very last one, and that was the first time I'd ever hired a coach. And then I actually ended up hiring the same coach to prep my wife that same year. And then I coached my wife after that, and then eventually she turned pro. Yeah. But we were going through it at the same time. And something that I actually created inside of my own preps was, when I was in a prep, I didn't want anybody to know.
Yeah.
So then you say, well, how do you do that? And I said, well, if I make the decision to not eat what y'all are eating, if I make the decision to weigh my food out before I eat dinner, if I make the decision to not go to this place, or I do go to this place, but maybe I'm not eating the cakes and doing all the things, that's my choice. But I'm not telling you, oh, it's because I'm in a contest prep.
Right.
It's just a part of the journey, right? And so with that being said, I think that beautifully kind of flows into how her and I actually work together as husband and wife to help our kids become the healthiest versions of themselves. Yeah. And I think this relays a little bit to a question that you had asked earlier, but with her and I, it's deeply rooted in friendship, and it's also deeply rooted inside of health. Mm-hmm. So she doesn't come from the healthiest family. I don't come from a very health-forward family. And so between the two of us, we share that commonality in the fact that we want our kids to be active. We want our kids to be healthy. We want our kids to grow up to be the strongest versions of themselves. And it's important for her and I to actually lead by example for our children, so that the day will come when we're not around, but the gym is there, and they're still in there doing what they love to do because they were shown how to be healthy.
Yeah.
So that's the legacy that I want to leave with my kids. Is I just want them to be the healthiest versions of themselves. I want them to be the most confident versions of themselves. And I really want them to learn what it's like to be a confident human on this planet. Because truthfully, there's enough negative out there. And if you allow the world to shut you down, it can shut down your confidence.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And our children, that is our legacy, man.
Yeah.
That's the way that we pass the baton. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
So I got a funny question for you related to the family and the household.
Yeah.
If we were to do a pantry check in the Grazione household right now.
Pantry check.
What are we finding, man? You know, I'm sure a lot of your clients wonder, like, does his whole family live like this all the time?
No, I mean, you would find my wife's been on like a throwaway binge as of late. So like
Okay.
if it's anything that she doesn't really want in the house, it's gone.
Yeah.
But my kids still have cereal. Granted, we're trying to make a good choice. They got like some protein cereal. They've got the Cookie Crisp.
Yeah.
My kids love bacon and eggs, guacamole, chips and salsa, all that kind of stuff. I think probably the worst thing you'd find in my refrigerator would be cookies.
Yeah.
My wife, after dinner, she'll always make a tray of cookies. And then
Yeah.
sometimes my daughters, they'll want to make a plate of cookies or whatever too. So I'd say honestly, probably the cookies. But other than that, I mean, we don't really have a lot of like quote unquote junk stuff laying
Right.
around the house. If we do, it's like, you know, veggie straws. I'll get my kids like the beef jerky sticks and all
Yeah.
that kind of thing. They eat a ton of fruit. So I'd say like 90% of my house is pretty clean. But the other 10%, we do have ice cream all the time, just in case anybody's concerned. Yes, we have ice cream all the time. I keep the ice cream bars in the fridge, in the garage. We'd probably also have some in the back. My daughter loves ice cream every night. It's kind of like the end of the day when like everybody's kind of winding down. We've eaten dinner. Most of the time they'll have an ice cream as long as they worked out that day.
Yeah.
As long as they did
You
something
had to earn it.
physically active, I'm like, hey, you burned off the glucose. You're good to go. Eat the ice cream. But that's also not to say I don't punish my kids. Like if they don't exercise, I'm not going to say, hey, no, you can't have that because you didn't exercise. Or if you ate it, I'm not going to tell you to go do a bunch of cardio.
Yeah.
Not at all. I'm just saying that I try to teach balance as much as possible.
For sure.
So if you are going to have that thing at night, well, just make sure that you got some type of a workout in. Because ultimately, if you're not moving your body, you're not burning off the things that you're eating. And that's how a lot of childhood nowadays is like everybody's walking around in a surplus of consuming everything,
Right.
whether it be you're consuming on the phone, you're consuming food, you're eating because you're bored, whatever. So I think there's just a lot of health problems right now in the United States of America that are kind of rooted inside of boredom and distraction. And I just kind of want to teach my kids that, you know, if you're going to be an athlete, you need to fuel your body, but also by all means, eat the ice cream, eat the chips.
Yeah, live life.
Just make sure that you're not overly indulging in them.
Yeah. You know, I often tell a lot of our clients that have children, one, make sure they understand macros, protein, carbs, and fats.
Yeah, I love that.
And then two, calories in versus calories out.
Yeah.
Two simple concepts that I think most children can adapt to that'll set healthy eating standards for the rest of their life. I like you, didn't grow up eating very healthy foods.
Yeah.
You know, we did the best we could, but we didn't have those kind of options. So it's super, super important.
Yeah, I mean, if you break that down really simple, I mean, you can teach your kids what fats are easy. It's like, okay, what is a fat? And they're like, oh, I don't know, Daddy. I'm like, well, whole eggs have fat, guacamole has fat, peanut butter has fat, oils have fat, you know, and they're like, oh, okay. And then I'm like, do you know what fat's good for? And they're like, no, Daddy, I don't know. And I'm like, well, it's good for your endocrine system, your hormones, your hair, your skin, your nails. You need it. And they're like, oh, okay. So if I eat fat, I'm going to get smarter. And I'm like, to a degree, yes, it's going to help your brain. And I'm like, what do carbs do? And they're like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, they give you energy. And they're like, well, what are carbs? I'm like, all the fruits, you know, the rice, the brown rice, the pasta, all that kind of stuff. And then the protein. Right? And they say, well, what does protein do? And they're like, it gives you muscles. I'm like, exactly. And I'm like, what's the protein? And they're like, eggs, steak, chicken, protein bars, the protein shakes, all that stuff. And even if you just teach your kids that, I mean, that took what, 2 minutes?
What a good foundation, though.
They're going to have a foundation. And then they just know, okay, well, every time I eat, I should probably have some protein, fat, carb, collectively in the same meal.
Yeah. No, it's huge, man. I love that. And I also love when you mention protein, they hit the double bottom.
Oh, yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah.
So one thing that I hear often, and I'm sure you do too, and we've actually had some changes to the way people approach this, is cholesterol is bad.
Yeah,
so for the longest, you weren't supposed to eat eggs, and you weren't supposed to eat this and that. Doing what we do, we know that that's not necessarily the truth. So can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on cholesterol, triglycerides, and really the impact that they have on the body?
It's definitely changed. You know, I used to think that cholesterol was something that, if uncontrolled, it could definitely lead to some long-term health complications, which I do agree that it can. if it's uncontrolled, right? So what you would basically want to monitor is total cholesterol. You want to monitor LDL cholesterol. Now, if you happen to notice that those two begin to trend upward, so total cholesterol begins to trend like 250s plus, right? And then LDL cholesterol begins to trend 120s, 150s, and so on. Make sure that your triglycerides are not also converting at the same pace that that the LDL and the total cholesterol are increasing. Because ultimately, well, what that looks like is, think about if you pour olive oil on top of water and the olive oil is just floating, right? Triglycerides are basically can end up making your blood almost more of like a jelly type of substance,
wow.
which ultimately is where a lot of cardiovascular disease starts to happen. So what I like to see on blood work, if I'm analyzing a client, we're just kind of checking for heart issues or anything, is I want to see total cholesterol around like 200, maybe approaching it, maybe 170 to 200. I actually like for cholesterol to be at the higher end of the range because of the fact that I'm a natural. So with that being said, we have to produce our own hormones.
Right.
And the king of the hormonal cascade is cholesterol, right? So therefore, if you have optimal cholesterol levels, you're kind of sending those plus signals all the way throughout the entire hormone
Right.
cascade. If you don't have them and they're not positive, and this is when you see blood work and like testosterone is low, DHEA is low, estrogen's low, progesterone is low, everything's low because of the fact that maybe there's low cholesterol. So I don't think that it's something that we have to be deathly afraid of, as far as like whole eggs are bad, red meat's bad, like all. No, I don't believe that at all.
Right.
I think cholesterol is good. And I think your diet should contain cholesterol. Granted, I think the type of dietary fats that you consume are very important as well. So I'm not ever going to recommend somebody going and having a bunch of saturated fats from French fries and the various types of oils and vegetable oils and all that. But I would say if you could narrow it down to like the fats from animal-based proteins,
Right.
olive oils, fats from various like guacamole, those types of things. I think if you can narrow the fats down and keep them, healthy single ingredient food items, kind of get away from the subset of oils and you go up and down the street and everybody's just frying everything. If you can stay away from that stuff, you got a much better likelihood of having healthy cholesterol levels.
Right.
But in terms of being a natural and somebody who wants to produce their own hormones, having cholesterol is pivotal in that entire process.
Huge. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I agree.
Yeah.
And I spend a lot of time trying to show people that.
The
It's super
triglycerides are the most important piece of it, though. Like
Yeah.
if your cholesterol is increasing and you are just dumping triglycerides, this is something I think the audience will find helpful. But in times of high stress, high trauma, chaos, and if you're an entrepreneur, you're maybe married, you've got multiple kids, you're managing everything. Sometimes how you manage those specific things, you can turn to specific substances and you can just kind of be in chaos. Um, I try to manage it the best way I possibly can, which means that I'm not going that route, even if things do get somewhat stressful. But I have a lot of different coping mechanisms that I can use, like breathing, walking, resistance training, doing the things that are going to help me get healthier. The problem I see though is that when people enter a long-term, status of stress, I think you have two separate pathways. One of the pathways is you could develop, kind of like a client that would almost, from an epigenetic perspective, they're almost more genetically predispositioned to go the insulin resistant, high insulin, type 2 diabetic route, but it's rooted in stress.
Right.
So once you take the central nervous system and you have this, like I mentioned earlier, you've got your sympathetic dominance and your parasympathetic. When you're trapped in that sympathetic dominance, from a genetic perspective, what does your physiology tend to do? It's either going to go this way or it's going to go this way.
Right.
Now, if it goes this way, this is where you're more prone to like obesity, diabetes, insulin resistance, all of that. But then at the same time, you have another subset of people where they're more prone to heart problems. But they could look lean, they could look fit, they could look all that. But until you get their blood work back, you don't know what's going on. So they may look super healthy, but then you take a look at their labs, your cholesterol's all jacked up, triglycerides are crazy. And those are the people you have to worry about that are having heart attacks. So I think it's important to understand like where you lie, what are you more genetically prone to, and then be able to start to work backwards once you've kind of figured it out.
How often do you recommend the average person gets labs done?
Women more often than men. But I think it's rooted in the fact that women have a tendency to diet a lot more frequently than men because there's a societal pressure that women need to look a certain way. So therefore, they're always jumping from one diet to the next diet to the next diet to the next diet. They're also a lot more, they have a much higher propensity to yo-yo diet because
Right.
they're always, if you lose 10 pounds and then you gain back 3 of them, the normal woman will say, oh my God, I got to find another diet and I got to go at it again, right? If you're constantly doing that, you're manipulating your hormones all the time, right? Now, the law of thermodynamics does matter the most. So like if you are somebody that's chronically dieting, hormones are going up and down, you're going on low calories, then you're binging because you can't follow it, and then you're back on a diet and you're up and you're down. I'd probably recommend like once a quarter until you can get it under control. Now, I will say if you decide to hire the right coach and they can teach you what you need to know about your health, you may only have to do once a quarter for like 6 months, right? And then after that, it's like we don't have to check labs again for like a year.
Right.
Right. But getting them started, it's more frequent because what I want to do is I want to say, you don't feel well right now, right? This is what you told me.
Right.
You don't feel well. You've completed the MSQ. You don't feel good. Why? Right. Let's go ahead and let's get some blood work done so I can tell you exactly what's happening.
No guessing.
I don't want to guess. We have tests. Why do we have to guess? Right. So I'm going to look at the information and I'm going to say, okay, you said this is this and this and this and this. I can connect all those dots and I can look at your blood work and I can tell you exactly what's happening. Now, because you know better, or you're not going to go back to doing what you were doing before. And something I like to tell people is once I teach you this stuff, you can't unlearn it.
Right.
You know what I mean? So once we start on a path, I'll create the plan of action. And then usually 3 to 6 months later, whatever is going on internally that we found on labs that was making the client feel ill, we usually can fix it.
Right.
Right. And then once we have fixed it, now we have the ability to live at this high calorie intake where, usually you look pretty good, you feel pretty good, you can eat enough calories where you're not starving all the time, and you're hormonally healthy.
Right.
Okay. Now, once we get you healthy, that's where fat loss and building muscle there's a lot more opportunity there, right? Because you have fixed the thing that was slowing them down in the first place.
Right.
Now, this law of thermodynamics, calories in, calories out, evidence-based coaching, it works a lot better because you've made them feel better.
Right.
And when you get a client to feel better, guess what else they're going to do? They're going to be doing all the other stuff that makes them feel even better, right? The mindset's different, the physical's different, they're sleeping better, the sex drive is back, they just feel good. And most of the time when you can do all those things, they also start to drop some weight, even though you're not even trying.
Right.
A lot of it's because you're doing a really good job at helping them improve their quality of sleep. You're optimizing their hormones. You're getting them actually moving again. They're sweating again.
Reducing inflammation.
They're detoxifying again. You've got their inflammation under control. And so again, you're basically resetting their entire physiology to where now they feel great. And now all the things that they want to do regarding trying to build muscle and lose body fat, those things are a lot more likely to happen. So the first 6 months, if you have one of these metabolic dysfunction problems, it's probably going to be just deeply rooted inside of helping you feel really good again.
Right.
After that, then we can go into a fat loss phase or we can build muscle, but regardless, you're in a much better position.
Yeah.
So I would say that for women, 3 months, maybe again 3 months, fix everything, take them through a fat loss phase, probably a good idea to get labs again. Once you've gotten them down to a level where they feel really good, they're not trying to compete or anything, but they look good, they look the way they want to look, you've gotten their calories up, the hormones are healthy. When you get your next set of labs done, it's kind of depending on up to you and the coach.
Right.
Because if she wants to keep trying to diet for fat loss, we'd probably have to get labs checked more frequently. If she doesn't, and she just wants to focus on trying to build muscle, which I would highly recommend for all the ladies out there, build the muscle. You could build muscle for a year in a row, and as long as you're staying pretty lean, like your results are going to be awesome.
Absolutely.
For a guy, we're less prone to try to diet all the time. If we do go into a diet phase, it's like I'm going to get shredded for the summer, and then after the summer, I'm going to bulk.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So for us,
the bulk is as important as the cut.
For us, I think like annually is still a really good idea. For women, I'd probably start checking around like 35 years old. For men, I'd probably start checking around the same.
Yeah.
If you want to be super proactive, you could even check around like 30.
Yeah. Yeah, we at the clinic, our protocol, anybody that's on hormone replacement will do at least once every 6 months.
Mhm.
Typically within really the first year, we're doing it every
Mhm.
3 months to make sure that the people are dialed in, whatever peptide or hormone replacement they're
Yeah,
on. So,
absolutely.
I would say one common subset of clients that we help at Legacy Health and Wellness are women that are post-baby
Mhm.
and women that are in menopause or heading into menopause.
Mhm.
What are some pieces of advice that you would give to both of those groups of folks?
We'll do post baby first. I think the biggest misconception that I oftentimes see, or the biggest mistake that a lot of those women make, is they are in such a rush to diet again, right? So think about this. Support your body. Understand that what you just did is literally a blessing.
Yeah.
The stress you just put your body through for 9 months, literally growing another human, absolutely incredible, right? And so we can't necessarily be in a rush to just keep the stress accumulating. In my opinion, and I've had this conversation with my wife plenty of times, which anybody who doesn't know, my wife works as a birth coach. She's a birth doula, and she's helped over, I think, 130 something women locally here in the Tampa Bay area. And I've had this talk with her plenty of times. And I think if women could read a book, it's called The First 40 Days, phenomenal book, and to kind of allow you to understand what's the most important immediately having a baby. It's not vanity. It's not getting back in the gym and kicking ass as fast as possible. It's bonding with your child.
Right.
It's bonding with your family. It's protecting your space. It's protecting your child. It's embracing that memory, that moment that you're never going to get back.
Right.
You're never going to get it back. Embrace it. Take the first 30 to 40 days, hydrate yourself, ease back into it, get back to walking, get back to your routines, build a really healthy lifestyle again. And then at that point in time, you can kind of decide what you want to do after that. However, there's one thing that I think a lot of people don't consider, and that's the fact that the hormone prolactin is actually elevated for typically 6 months, 9 months, or 12 months after having a child. So think about the hormone for the female physiology. Prolactin is prolactation.
Mm-hmm.
So in order for you to produce lactation to feed the child, you have to have prolactin, right? However, prolactin is also fat protective.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're fighting against.
So if you're trying to feed your baby and you're also trying to lose body fat, prolactin's fat protective. So it's trying to get you to keep the fat on so you have the energy reservoirs to feed the child, to produce the lactation. Which if you've ever seen a woman, postpartum and she's doing she's stock hoarding like a lot of the milk, right? Just think about how energy expensive it is for the female physiology to make that much milk consistently over and over and over and over and over, and they're filling up freezers of this stuff, right? And the reality is most of the women that are doing that, they're not overly stressing their bodies. That's why they can produce it. Some women, though, they will overly stress their bodies, and then what ends up happening, because they're exercising too much, they're dieting again, they're trying to do a bunch of cardio too soon, is the fact that they'll actually shut down their supply because there's not enough energy availability to produce the lactation, right? I would say the other big problem that I see is women that are in such a rush to get back into the gym, they don't allow their abdominal wall to completely close back up. And so if you're in the gym trying to train abs too soon, but you still have the diastasis recti, which is basically the gap in between your abdominal wall, if you overstress those tissues, it may not ever close up again.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is why a lot of women will develop like instability around the pelvis and the hips and the abdomen afterwards, is if they got back into the gym too soon and they didn't allow that wall to close up. So I like to say, like, just try to like walk and easy exercise only for like the first 3 months. And then after that, you can decide what you want to do. But I'm a huge fan of resistance training in pregnancy. And the idea that women can't build muscle in pregnancies were ridiculous. I saw my wife got jacked during pregnancy, and now she's an advocate for it.
Yeah.
What was your other question?
So women that are heading into menopause or
heading into menopause. That could be an entire podcast episode by itself. Yeah, man, I would say the most powerful thing that I could say with that demographic is you need to gain control of it before you go into it. What I mean by that is if you're waiting till you're in your 50s, not to say it's too late, because it's never too late, but the longer you wait, the harder it is to adapt these healthy habits.
Right.
Right. So, like, if you're not used to having really healthy habits in your life, it's easier to do it in your 40s than it is in your 50s.
Agreed.
You know what I mean? And for most women, I'd say at 35, you really need to be like learning your body. You really need to be in a position where you're trying to focus on building as much freaking muscle as possible, eating as much protein as you can to sustain the muscle development, making sure you're in the body composition that you want to be in, having healthy, balanced hormonal profiles so that you can eat, I mean, breeze through menopause.
Yeah.
If you keep eating a high protein diet, your gut's healthy, you keep up with your walking and your exercise and all of that, in many cases, the menopause transition can be a lot smoother than it is. But what you end up having is you have a lot of women that are obsessed with dieting. You have a lot of women that are just hopping from diet to diet to diet to diet, right? And then they're losing muscle through their 30s. They're losing muscle going into their 40s. And the average menopausal age is between 48 and 51, maybe 52. So it's somewhere in there. But if you lose a significant amount of muscle going into menopause, what do you think is going to happen to your metabolism?
Yeah. Good point.
Then the diets that you used to do that worked, they no longer work. And there's a whole host of other hormone related issues that happen. One of the biggest issues that I see in the HRT space is the simple fact that I think when a woman's going through menopause, they'll go and they're like, hey, I'm going through menopause. Like, what should I do? I think most physicians are overly prescribing estrogen patches. So it's with the idea that when a woman enters menopause, that all estrogen's gone.
Right.
It's like, it doesn't just turn off like a light switch.
Yeah.
It's a slow decline of progesterone, which is the calming hormone in the female physiology, as well as estrogen, right? And then typically also usually androgens will begin to come down too. So it is a gradual decrease, but the transition is usually 5 to 10 years of time.
Right.
So just because you're in menopause, it doesn't mean you need an estrogen patch. And then I would say be mindful that if you go to a clinic and somebody's trying to recommend an estrogen patch without also recommending progesterone, chances are probably doing it backwards.
Absolutely.
I would recommend the progesterone first, and then over time let the estrogen kind of do its job. And then when it gets low enough, then you can prescribe the lowest dose patch. But what I'm seeing is overly prescribed patches, which is basically sending women into estrogen dominance. And then they're gaining like 10 to 15 pounds of fat that they didn't want to gain in the first place. And then when you ask them if they were put on progesterone as well to balance it out, they say no.
Right.
So what does estrogen dominance do, right? It's kind of like having a really bad cycle, right? Women are getting bloated, they're gaining body fat, they feel really uncomfortable around the midsection. And then that's also to say that the stress response inside of menopause is typically pretty high as well. So this is a time frame for most women where they're trying to grow businesses. They're creating families. They're raising kids. Maybe they're in a relationship and stuff is stressful. They got a lot of stress on their plate.
Right.
Right. So what can we essentially do to manage stress and also manage progesterone? I think if you can solve that equation, it's like a balancing act. It's like a seesaw. Yeah. If you can figure out how to balance that equation, which I think I've done a really good job at doing, you can help them lose body fat and build muscle inside of menopause. But all the science that we have basically states that women will gain fat, lose muscle in menopause. Yeah. So what we're trying to do is the complete opposite.
Yeah. I often scream from a rooftop, just because you're in your 40s and your 50s doesn't mean that life is this downhill slide.
No, it's just a number, man. Age is a number.
That's
you know
it.
what I mean? My wife is 40. My wife is 46. My wife's 46, I believe, and maybe 47. And and she's like, she always gets messages. She's like, "Girl, like, how are you in such awesome shape still?" Yeah. She's like, well, I watch what I eat. I eat a high protein diet, and I lift weights, and I do cardio.
That's it.
You know what I mean? Now it's simple for some people to say that. In some other instances, though, it's very N of one. So, with what we do, which is why I think the blood work is so valuable, is a simple fact that, I mean, in all honesty, like, there's nobody on the planet with your same exact lab panels.
Yeah.
Right? So think about most fat loss programs. They're going out to the dock with the biggest cast net they can get, and they're just launching that cast net. How many fish can I get into my net? What we're doing is we're catching that one bass, right?
Yeah.
We're pulling up and we're like, we're gonna totally redo everything just for you.
Yeah.
That's the uniqueness of what we offer, is a simple fact that there's nobody else on the planet that is you. Right? A lot of other coaching programs, they're just casting a huge net,
Right.
and they're not identifying any of the uniqueness things that make you so special or make you you. So I think there's a big market right now and a big opportunity for people to teach people what they need to know. And I think the really cool thing about people that are wanting to get involved in the industry as practitioners, as coaches, is the simple fact that there's so many opportunities to educate people and do it the right way, right? There's so many women that are coming out of bodybuilding contest preparations and their hormones are tanked. There's so many women that are coming out of a pregnancy and they don't know what to do. There's so many women that are entering perimenopause and they don't know what to do besides crash diet. There's a lot of men that don't feel their best and they're looking to be optimal. So the reality is, as a health coach, we can show up in that space. And as long as you have all of the tools you need on your tool belt to help a very diverse client population, you can make a huge impact.
Yeah. No, I agree, man. So as we kind of round things out, when you look at the educated diet, or you look at what we do at Legacy Health and Wellness,
Yeah.
what do you envision for the future of healthcare with all the changes that we see with Kennedy coming into his new role, and hormone replacement clinics popping up at every corner? What do you think the future of healthcare and really what we do looks like?
The evolution of health coaching, if you look at the future of it, and I think that's probably where we want to go, is like, how can we collaboratively work together to help people ultimately reach their health outcomes and their big goals and dreams, right? And I think a lot of that is understanding that you always have to constantly evolve. You have to consistently learn new things. And if I think back to 2009, 10, 11, 12, when I first started, a lot of the coaches that were well known back then, they're not around anymore because they stopped evolving, right? So what you want to think about is, what are the things that we can do as health coaching practitioners to be able to help kind of separate ourselves from other individuals that may still be lost in the Stoic ages doing meal plans only, right? And there's a lot of those out there still, right? You have like meal plans only coaching. You've got the macronutrient base, which I still think is a very good tool, right? But then you also have a lot of this disease prevention, which is where a lot of traditional Western medicine doctors are converging into the realm of functional medicine, right? So when you think about functional medicine, you're thinking about some of these more normal kind of signs and symptoms that people are dealing with now, which is a lot of the association with the gut health, a lot of association with adrenal insufficiency, low testosterone, high stress, hypothalamic amenorrhea. You're seeing a lot of these types of cases that are popping up. And in all honesty, most of them are going to a traditional Western medicine doctor and just being told either it's all in their head, it's going to be fine, there's nothing wrong, blood work says everything's fine, which, just talking about blood work, that could be an entire podcast in and of itself. But most of the time, they're not even checking or providing context to any of your labs. As an example, if you just came out of a very aggressive diet, right, and maybe you do have hypothyroidism, if you were to get your T3 back, which they'd never check that in the first place, they'd have to go to a company like yours and say, I just got done with a really aggressive diet, I kind of stalled out at the end, what kind of labs do you think I should get? You go to a traditional Western medicine doctor, they're just going to check your TSH. Now, if TSH is elevated, then they'll forward to T4, right? But they're never going to forward to T3 and then reverse T3 and then TPOAB and then TGAB either, right? So I think a company like yours can come in a really nice place and say, hey, we're willing to listen to you. We're going to hear you out. We understand that all the physiological things that you've been doing to put your body under a significant amount of stress could have negatively impacted what we're going to see on these labs. I just want to let you know that if there's some adaptations here, it's expected because of what you've done.
Of course.
But nonetheless, we can paint the picture and we can clearly articulate this is what's happening. I can't tell you the amount of cases that I've seen where I've seen 2.1s in regards to a T3, which, by the way, 2.0 or less is clinical hypothyroidism, which just means underactive, right? So your metabolism's not firing at the capability it's it's not working at its potential.
Right.
2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and they'll get this lab, and then they'll go ask somebody for their professional assistance, and the person will say, everything's in range, everything's fine. And it's like, I'm pretty sure a 2.1 is really darn close to a 2.0. Are you sure you don't want to investigate that just a little bit? I see that happen a lot. I also see a lot of other things with regard to like blood glucose and insulin, A1C, anemia problems, triglyceride issues. I see a lot of different things inside of the lab panels that I'm seeing. But the reason why I think that the way we're doing it, which is very individualized, is the future, is because the traditional Western medicine model is failing at an alarming rate. And I think the more educated people become, they're looking for another option.
Yeah.
And that's where I think companies like ours really have a really strong place.
Yeah, no, I agree. You know, one of the questions that I get often, specifically about our partnership between the Educated Dieter and Legacy Health and Wellness, is, don't you guys compete against each other?
No.
And I always laugh at that, because I think that it's been, if anything, one of the best partnerships Legacy's had. Awesome. Personally, you know how much I love you, man. Yeah. But you know, for us to be able to help people congruently in both of our modalities, what a blessing it is to do this work.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I mean, I was referring labs out, for a very long time. And once you and I built a really good relationship, I was like, all right, I'm gonna get a couple lab panels through, and we'll just see how it goes. Mm-hmm. And you guys over deliver time after time after time. I mean, it's faster. My clients actually enjoy walking into Foreign Co. They meet Sonia. The experience is phenomenal. I even had my kids go there to get labs run, right? And they loved it. I mean, it was the best experience possible. And so our relationship from a business perspective, I've never seen it as competition. I mean, in all honesty, like, you guys offer a service, I offer a service. Granted, you coach, but there are so many people in the world that need a coach. To have that kind of mindset is not the right mindset. Right. We need to be thinking, like, how can I help you optimize what you're doing? And in equal parts, how can I help Will optimize what he's doing?
Absolutely.
And there is no competition. I mean, I think we have to essentially show up to bring each other up, which is why I love our group over at Foreign Co, because everybody lifts each other up.
Yeah.
You know, there's a group of maybe like 5, 6 maybe of us, right? And like, we're all just constantly trying to elevate each other.
Pushing it.
And it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, the adage, iron sharpens iron.
That's right.
It's so true, man.
That's right.
Well, listen, man, I appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to join us for this podcast. I'm gonna hit you with 3 questions to close us out here.
Rapid fire.
Rapid fire.
Ready.
Will's favorite cheat meal.
Oh, sushi. Yes, sushi.
Any specific role?
I like the spicy ones with fish on them. I don't know what they're called.
Okay.
Usually like volcano, icy tuna, all those.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. Or my wife's pasta.
Yeah.
My wife's spaghetti's really good.
Yeah.
She's a really good cook.
She makes a mean
sourdough bread. Her sourdough bread. Sourdough bread with a load of butter on it. Yeah, I get down with that too.
Awesome, man.
Yeah.
Favorite pastime? When you are not making people's dreams come true, what is it that you're doing?
Favorite pastime? I enjoy the peace and tranquility of being on the water. Near the water, by the beach, trying, whether I'm going fishing, being on a boat, not being on a boat. If I'm by the water, it's where I find my peace.
Yeah, I love it, man.
Yeah.
And last one, probably the most difficult one, is if you had 3 words that your wife, your kids, and the people closest to you could describe you as, what would those 3 words be?
Well, I guess this is my purpose in this world, right? Is what I hope that they would say, because the day is going to come when I'm gone. Man, that's an emotional one. Loving. He listened and genuinely cared, and he tried his best to do what was best for us.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome.
Oh, God.
Well, guys, Will from the Educated Dieter. Love you, brother. More to come, man.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
I appreciate it.